Hello and welcome to Mystic Chat. Today, and I'm gonna have Luke actually introduce our guest because afraid I'm gonna mess up the last name. So let me introduce myself. My name is Chris Allen. I am an ordained minister at the Fellowship of the Phoenix. I'm also an author. In my current book is called Other World Ecstatic Witchcraft for the Spirits of the Land. So a quick plug for that. I would like to introduce my co-host, Laura Gonzalez. Laura, introduce yourself.
Hello, everybody. My name is Laura Gonzalez. I'm a minister with Circle Sanctuary. I'm a priestess of the goddess. I am a podcaster, bilingual producer, and I'm also a witch for hire. And I like nature a lot. Thank you. Let me introduce you to Ruby Ruse.
Hello, thank you so much, Laura. I am Ruby Ruse. I am a pagan YouTube artist that specializes in modern fairy faith, spirituality, fairy folklore, and fairy themed events. So I do hope you'll check out my channel, Fairy Fortunes, on YouTube. And with that, I will turn it over to Luke Babb, which I understand you contributed to the book that we're going to be talking about tonight.
That's right. So hi, everybody. My name is Luke. I use they, them pronouns. I am a devotional polytheist, a magical jack of all trades, and I think most pertinently to our topic for today, a member of the Troth. Today we are actually, I'm really excited. The Troth recently published this lovely book, Blood Unbound, Loki Devotional. Which I contributed to, which several of the people in our audience today contributed to. And we were lucky enough to have our editor join us today. So that's Bat Collazo. Bat, would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Absolutely, thank you. My name is Bat Collazo. I use Zzer pronouns, and I'm the editor-in-chief of the book that Luke just showed. I will show the paperback that I have with me right here. Blood Unbound. I'm of course a member of the Troth. I do identify as a Lokian as well as a heathen. I identify as actually a queer heathen of color. I focus primarily on Loki, Loki's family, and all of the heathen gods from what I see as the three main pantheons within the Norse path. I also have a overall polytheistic path that focuses on my ancestors, both of blood, which are my Puerto Rican Boricua ancestors, as well as my Polish ancestors and ancestors of choice, and lots of other different kinds of spirits. And yeah, I'm really excited here today. As Luke pointed out, so yeah, they are a contributor and several of the other contributors are in the audience. So I'll give a shout out. I see, forgive me if I'm missing anybody, but I see right now India, Melanie, and Amy. We're all contributors to the book as well, which is exciting. So thank you so much for having me on.
And because we have a few new members and people are joining us as we talk, just a reminder of some of the rules of engagement today. We are actually live on Facebook for the first time today. It sounds like none of us have actually checked, but it looks like it. We also have the chat open here. So if you have questions, if you really want to cross-examine Bat in some exciting way, hit us up there. But we will have our show like that. And then afterwards, as always, we will have a tiny close things down. Yes, we are actually live on Facebook. I see it.
I'm so excited.
Afterwards, we'll close things down and we'll have a question and answer sort of conversational section for people who are still with us. So I think I want to just get started with how you just introduced yourself, Bat, with the three major pantheons of the heathen path. I know that some folks who are listening along to this might have their ears pricking at that. Could you sort of walk us through what you mean?
Absolutely. So you are correct that a lot of people define gods and beings within Norse polytheism, Norse paganism in a lot of different ways. For me personally, I think that they are not so easily split. I don't think that it's as simple as really delineated categories, but in a very simplified sense, I worship the Aesir, the Vanir, and the Jotnar, which are what I would say are three tribes of beings, of entities within Norse lore. The Aesir are typically what people would think of when people are talking about how they are Ausatru or devoted to gods such as Odin, who I do also work with. And the Vanir, so an example would be, for instance, Freya is considered Vanir. And the Jotnar are a little bit more controversial. Not everyone actually sees them as deities when they are not directly linked in with some of the other gods. So there's some intermarriage happening where sometimes Jotnar are then seen as deities, but in their own rights, I perceive them as deities and worship them. So Jotnar would include, Loki is seen as both Aesir and Jotnar, and very much like a border crosser between those. But Skadi would be an example of a goddess who married into the Aesir and is then sometimes considered Aesir. But there are lots and lots of Jotnar that for me personally in my practice, I see as just as worthy of respect and worship.
Oh, well, that's exciting. I have to say I have a fondness because, Loki is the father of one of my goddesses, Hela. And, if you hang out with Mickey, it's all about the skulls and bones and ancestors and debts. So I'm loving this. So the first question I have of you is, why a devotional to Loki? What was your inspiration and why? Why?
Sure. Yeah. So, and I will say that I tell this tale a little bit in the introduction in this book, but the idea basically is that a bunch of us were at the in-person Troth Moot in 2019. So the Troth is a US based but international inclusive heathen organization, and Troth Moot is it was a live in-person event. It hasn't been for this year, and it won't be this year, and it wasn't last year. But so 2019, the Troth had for a while policy that restricted Troth members from hailing Loki during Troth sponsored events. So they didn't restrict people's personal practice, but at Troth events, people who wanted to raise a toast to Loki or give some kind of prayer publicly to Loki, there was a ban in place. So a lot for 10 years, a lot of work went into debating that and ultimately voting on removing that. 2019 was the first Troth Moot where that had been removed. So a lot of us, including myself, showed up primarily because we were really excited about being able to hail this God who is so beloved to us in this space. And that is when the idea for the book came about. I specifically remember it was like over breakfast. I think other people were talking about it, but I just have a really clear memory of Luke actually turning to me and being like, "Do you want to do a Loki book?" And I was like, "Yeah, let's do it." Let's
do a Loki book.
and it has manifested. This is sort of the starting point. And I have some experience in the past as editor-in-chief of a poetry magazine, and so I felt pretty confident about my ability to take it on. And excited about it. So
I think I understand. Oh, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I think I understand the title, Blood Unbound, because there is the story of the blood oath between Odin and Loki. So I'm wondering, is that the purpose behind the name, or can you explain more about the title and where that came from?
Sure. Yeah. So I love that. For one, I love that interpretation of it. And I think that is absolutely, that would be really relevant. So I love that. I love that words can mean different things and, you know, have meanings that I didn't maybe intend, but I think are really relevant. Yeah, so for me, and I was trying to think of a title. That was one of the last things. The cover art was already done and I still hadn't had a title. I know for me, what I was thinking about is one, that I actually see Loki as Lolar, which is a deity attested to have given the gift of blood or goodly hue, sort of like, you know, the idea of like flush in the skin, to humans, so a creator god. And there's some amount of attestation that is almost certainly Loki, that the name is connected with Loki. So the idea of giving a gift of blood. The Unbound part, then, what I'm thinking about is the story of Loki's binding, and as well as sort of on a maybe a slightly less huge scale, the idea of Loki being banned in that way for a while and then being, you know, free to be healed. So that was sort of what I was going with, in terms of that title, but I love that there are like lots of other ways it can be interpreted. And I will also say, as a sort of fun fact, I don't know if many people outside of like a few close friends know this, but I was having such a hard time thinking about a title that I actually like tried to do a meditation, like an astral journey, to connect with Loki, to be like, give me a title. And it didn't really go very well in terms of me receiving the actual message. I feel like I came out of that sort of trance state being like, fish face. I'm like, this is not a good title for a book. I like wasn't quite getting it. And then finally I was just like, okay, here's what it's gonna be. But I think later on, Luke pointed out to me, perhaps Loki was trying to impart something like net weaver because of his associations with the net and fish and stuff. But it's sort of my funny story about how the book could have been named Fish Face.
That's hilarious.
Had allowed it.
I think you would have liked it personally.
I was about to say, it's apropos, it is Loki after all. Speaking of Loki and things like that, so I'm sure everyone in the live audience exactly knows who Loki is, but we have a bigger audience on social media and podcasts and things like that. So can you explain to us who Loki is and why you felt called to have a devotional outside of the story you just told? Talk to us about your relationship with him and what that means to you with the trickster deity.
Sure. Yeah. So it is a huge question, really, to define Loki, because I think, like all gods, really, but particularly him, are very hard to pin down into one specific thing. But I will say, I do see Loki as a god associated with change, with being a catalyst, with blood, as I talked about, with shape-shifting, with the idea of sort of straddling a border between different identities, fluidity in that sense. I definitely personally associate Loki very much with the idea of queerness, with the idea of gender shifting as well, which is something that happens, in actual Norse lore as well, and with family. I think Loki is often very much defined by his potentially chosen family relationships, as you mentioned, Ruby, the idea of being blood brothers with Odin, as well as his children, his partners. I know this isn't a really clear definition, but yeah, he's a deity that, and I use he, but I will also freely use any pronoun with Loki. I'll throw that out there as well. But yeah, a deity who really encompasses a lot of different aspects. But I guess if I needed to simplify the most, I would say that for me, he definitely leads me towards a lot of change, a lot of pushing through stagnation, stuff like that. For me personally, I found out about Loki as a kid. I was actually, and I tell a little bit of the story in the book too, but as a real little kid, I was raised Roman Catholic. I didn't know I was queer at the time. And, you know, as I mentioned early on in my intro as well, like I identify as mixed race, you know, so a lot of those sort of in-between experiences. And one of my classmates actually, who was actually a recent immigrant, is the one who sort of introduced me to the existence of Loki. And I was really fascinated, but didn't formally really start working with him until I was an adult. But yeah, for me, I'm oath to Loki. I consider Loki, you know, I worship a lot of different gods. So as a Lokian, I don't say that like I only worship Loki or anything like that, but like, you know, my fully trusted one, that, yeah. So yeah, Loki is very beloved to me.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I have to ask a question, and you really have brought a lot of questions to the surface of my mind, being an immigrant myself. But the first thing that I want to understand, because to me, it's almost an impossibility, but when I hear you say it, is true. Loki was banned for 10 years. What was that about, and why? That is something, like, I don't get how a god can be banned from worshiper.
Yeah.
Can you explain that?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and it really is mind-boggling, like to me, when you're outside of that situation, like to really see like how could this even be. So the best way I can explain it, I'll explain it in a couple different ways. One, it is my perception that people can be really afraid of things that Loki brings, like change, like the fact, as Chris said, that he's the parent of death. So these things that are like so important and so sacred, right? Very, very holy, like important things in life, but that are uncomfortable. There has been some backlash against deities who represent those kinds of things within heathenry. I will say specifically as well, like Loki definitely through the years has been framed in a very good and evil Christianized mindset of being the equivalent of the Norse devil. And now I'm not saying that everybody who doesn't like Loki or who dislikes Loki or whatever the case may be, like thinks that, but that is a huge component of why Loki is so feared, is basically the idea that, oh, he'll mess up your life. He's chaos. He'll destroy you. He's the devil. Even though people are stepping away from Christianity, still kind of imposing these like very, very rigid ideas about what good and bad is. It's particularly ironic to me because a lot of the gods that are very welcome and have always been welcome in heathen spaces such as Odin are arguably worse to humans in the lore than Loki is, like attested to be tricking humans, you know, killing humans for specific purposes, all kinds of things. But I would also suggest that because of some of Loki's ambiguity, because of his gender fluidity, because of the fact that he is more difficult to pin down to like really easy to understand. I think that makes people uncomfortable as well.
Do you think it's because he can't fit into a neat category? Do you think that is some of the disparaging ideas behind him, why people have a hard time grasping that? Is it that he just doesn't fit into a box?
Yeah, I would say, I would agree that people and humans in general, right, do have a hard time with anything that doesn't fit into a simple box. And I think the idea too that Loki brings gifts that sort of disrupt the status quo, that help people like question what might be going on. That's really frightening to a lot of people. Yeah, and I would say also that there's a lot of emphasis on his role in Ragnarok. So part of the lore, which a lot of people will conflate sort of with a Revelations end of days Christianized idea of the end of the world as well, which I think again is oversimplifying it. And even so, Loki, one of his by names is World Breaker, right? And of course that can be sounding very scary for a lot of people, like breaking the whole world. But for me personally, I think there's lots of different ways of interpreting spirituality, of interpreting the lore. And for me, I think about it in terms of cycles, the idea of things have to end for new things to begin. And yeah, and that it's ongoing, that it's not like, one day, 110 years from now, Loki will destroy the world. Like, I think of it as, he's part of that cycle of, part of that reset. After the Aesir do a whole lot of kind of corruption and destruction through order to begin with. So
I think of, by your explanation, more of a Luciferian character that, of course, being more like Lucifer, is going to come and break the status quo and scare recently converted people,
yeah.
and or as we call it, recovering Catholics, because we carry a lot of guilt. I mean, it doesn't matter how long ago you left Catholicism, guilt and punishment are ingrained in our brains. So dealing with the image that remind you of that shadow that you don't want to see, that is chaotic, is always going to be a confrontation to our own personality, I think. Thank you so much for explaining that. My second question, since I have the mic, how does half or whatever percentage, forgive me for assuming, Latinx person is practicing a Norse religion or religions? And please weave in there, I have to ask you, the fear that people who look like me have to go practice at places and spaces that are run or overseen by people who look like you or like Luke.
Absolutely. That's a great question. I'm really excited you asked that. So yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I am Boricua on my mom's side, all the way back. And I am white passing, right? So that is something that I struggled with for years, honestly, when I started to feel drawn, and I was drawn to Loki first and then the rest of the pantheon. But he really was my inroad. And I really did struggle with that for years, particularly knowing the very real fact that there are subsets of heathenry that are white supremacists, that are that is a very real thing that happens. And people can say like, oh, well, any religion has has awful oppressive people in it. That's true, but there is a particular emphasis for a lot of people on co-opting Norse religion for the purposes of white supremacy. So that was a real thing. I will say that the way that I, and it's still something I think about all the time. It's something to the degree that I'm cautious about, where I am when I'm wearing the Thor's hammer that I wear, and if it's tucked in my shirt or out of my shirt, because I don't want to make people afraid, because I do look white. Or I can, depending on who's perceiving me and in what circumstance, right? And for me, sort of the ways that I have grappled with that is one, to know that I can still respect and love, and work with in a spiritual way to some degree, the deities of my Boricua ancestors, and still have so much love for Loki and the Norse gods, and not let basically not let white supremacists keep me away from something that is truly beneficial, like to me and my and even my work in the world, to try to fight things like racism. Loki was absolutely vital for me, as a support for me about 4 or 5 years ago when I had to file a workplace complaint against a racist boss, who was making really violent statements. I was terrified. I had almost no money. I was in a delivery driver job, very, very poor, and praying to Loki actually about change, about having the bravery to just really destroy some of these systems as best as I could in just this little way, was so vital to me. So that also really gave me the courage to see that, like, even though these beliefs have been used in certain ways, that doesn't mean that I am, upholding colonization and racism by having these beliefs and loving them so much. So that's sort of where I'm at with it, but it is an ongoing, it is always in my mind. And I think it's a really, really good question. Yeah.
Thank you.
So I want to talk about what's in the book. What's in it? What's going on? What can we share some highlights of the book? Like, what, I mean, I'm gonna buy the book, but why should I buy the book?
Sure. So I will say that you should buy the book because it really does have a really wide variety of different kinds of devotional work. So what I mean by that is that there is nonfiction that's more scholarly in it. There is poetry. There is a queer comedy play in it. There are photographs, art. There's a comic strip in it that makes me cry every time I read it. It's very good. I this artist did a really good job. And there's an original translation of an old Faroese ballad about Loki rescuing a child
That's
that is
cool.
very difficult to find in English. That is an original translation for this book. Someone's master's thesis is in here, and there's and there's some rituals in here as well. So I would say there's a wide variety of a whole bunch of different stuff. Whether you are new to Loki and are like, who is Loki? What is this about? Or I also wanted to make it something that would be beneficial for people who know Loki very, very well and want something that really speaks to their emotional experience or new things to think about.
That's awesome. Luke, you've been quiet.
I mean, there's so much that's already been said. I will say,
You're a contributor.
It's true, I am. I will say that Bat and I have talked about this at some length on our friend John's podcast, Gifts of the Weird. But Yeah, I am just so impressed by this book and how it turned out. One of the things that really I found to be super useful as somebody who's been working with Loki for a very long time at this point, very like surprisingly long, is that in the preface or in the introduction by Phyllis Steinhauser, who's actually been on the show before. We have a basically a chart of all the references to Loki in the lore, a
Mm,
sort of a little summary of what they are and where you can find them.
mm,
And it is so useful. It is so useful for anybody who wants to start doing the research themselves, or for anybody who's like, where is that the thing where with the heart, where is that actually from? Help. Um uh but yeah, I don't know, Bat. What sorts of like as you were putting this together, as you had I'm not even sure how many contributors to it. Um what sorts of things did you like consider as to like what can go into it? What should be like foregrounded, how to like set it up?
Sure. Yeah, so ultimately there are 16 contributors, myself included. So 15 if I don't count me. um, yeah, I guess my intent when starting out was first of all to make sure that it was new content. To the best of my knowledge, there's not really anything in here that has been published like in a book before. And that's because I didn't want just kind of recycled content on Loki. I really wanted like a book with fresh stuff on Loki. And in terms of what went in, I was just really looking for anything, really anything. Oh, there's recipes in here too. I forgot about that when I was talking to Chris about what else is in here. Just things that represent people's experiences with Loki, and that's exactly what I got, and I was very pleased with it. I think that everything, everybody's coming from a slightly different perspective, but I was very, very pleased with the submissions. I will say again, back to this it is very strange, the odd point of banning gods, that there was one contribution that was not able to be published in this because the Troth, they're working on it. We'll see. But the Troth right now actually still has some policies in place about some of Loki's children and one of his partners. The idea of beings that some heathens see as quote unquote destructive to the natural order. Um, and while they're able to be talked about in here, they appear in this book, but the Troth Publications right now has a policy against what is the term? Don't quote me on this, but something about like promoting their worship, basically. So there was one piece that was really beautiful that had a hail to I can say it because I'm not speaking for the Troth now. It had a hail to Angerboda, who I work with myself personally. But that was the one thing that I could not put in. It was an art piece, it was hand drawn, so it's not like that part could be removed. The whole piece would have just not been in. It was integral to that piece. So that's something that's the one example of something that there's still work to be done, and unfortunately that's the only piece that didn't make it in. Otherwise, everything that people sent to me, it wasn't just a free-for-all. Like I was actually trying to piece them together in a way that flowed and made sense and read well, and really good pieces, and that's what I got. So I'm very happy about that. Everything else ended up going in.
that's awesome. Yeah, when you're talking about the whole, you can't promote certain gods and deities. The thing I have to remember all the time is that when I first came into being a witch back in the 90s, the early 90s, at that time, witchcraft and paganism were the same thing. They said if you're a witch, you observe nature, you're a pagan. So for that philosophy going through the 90s and my 20s, I thought that everyone did witchcraft. I thought everyone did magic. I thought everyone honored the old ways. It wasn't until I was educated that witch itself, the whole idea, is a thing that even the word itself is only a few hundred years old in the sense of how we use it today. And so it actually boggled me that if you look at like, for example, the Cherokee tribe or the Lakota tribe, you cannot call certain energies in ceremony. You can't. Yeah, because they feel like if we're doing a prayer, you're going to bring in the energies that may disrupt the ceremony. Okay. But what I think what's hard for me and a whole lot of people, especially in this space, you have women, the LGBTQ. We have people who we're constantly challenging ourselves and challenging the status quo, and that's kind of our go-to. So of course we love tricksters, and we love Loki and Hela and Fenrir and all these things, but to the white, straight, cis a person who just converted from Christianity to heathenism, they still, I think Laura said it to where they take in all their old baggage and they bring it into heathenism and other forms of paganism too. And I think we've said it on the show several times. We love to destroy and challenge those concepts, and it sounds like from your devotional book, it sounds like you're doing it in a way that's heart-centered. And I have to appreciate that, because sometimes I know I can come in with all guns blazing, and I'm not even gonna be sorry about it. So I love that you're challenging that with a devotional. I think it's really cool.
And I also agree with the idea to leave certain things to mystery, either culturally or spiritually, religiously. There are a lot of things that I know from the Mexica people that I don't ever do publicly or talk about it publicly, because if you know, and if you don't, then it's probably not for me to be saying it to everybody on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter and whatnot. And this is definitely a story for another day. When we're not filming, about calling things that can get out of control. I was at a party with about 60 people, and somebody decided to call Discordia. That's a story for another day. But look, you had something that you were going to say.
Oh yeah, I mean, I feel like I also wanted to just sort of nod to the fact that as somebody who's currently on the steer of the currently on the reed of the troth, and as the vice steer is here, and I feel like I would get my knuckles wrapped if I did not say, like the Loki ban and the what I lovingly refer to as the verboten Jotunbloten ban, are both part of the history of the Troth as an organization that comes out of a larger history of heathenry that we frankly don't have time to go into today, but Ben Wagner over at Heathen History Podcast has done. And there was always a difference between like your own personal practice in which you can do whatever and group practice, partially because of a specific heathen religious practice that says that when we are all together, the religious things that we do affect all of our faiths. We are weaving ourselves into a tapestry, and our faith threads essentially are going to be pulling on each other. And any deity or spirit that we invoke into that space is now a part of all of our faith threads. So there are like quasi-religious reasons for this as well. My opinion on that being what it is, I don't think that you can actually have people in the space with you who do this practice and not have your fate mixed with theirs and their deities.
Yep.
But that is, as far as I can tell, somewhat of a minority belief within the larger group. I'm suddenly very interested, Bat, to hear your thoughts about the devotional itself as like a web of weird.
Mm.
And
Yeah. So, and I'll say too, and this is a whole other conversation, right? We super don't have time for this, but it is difficult to define weird in like a short amount of time without using a word like fate, but I do see it as importantly different than how people conceive of fate. But yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, there's so many possible ways to answer that, right? There's so many pieces to it, but I mean, first of all, the fact that I did end up putting a preface in here called A Note on Loki's Family, basically making my argument for why the ban, which as Luke pointed out, doesn't have anything to do with personal practice, but Troth sponsored practice, why it's inappropriate. That itself is me sort of pouring some of those words into the well of weird, so to speak. I would say that also, while the contributors don't all know each other, some of us do know each other, but I think any book where a bunch of people are getting together and making something is weaving all these different voices together. And when it's for a specific purpose, I think that can be really powerful. Whether it's neutral or in a way that is beneficial to people or harmful, and hopefully in this case beneficial. So I would say, yeah, the creation of a book, especially a book with multiple people, is itself an example of that weaving. I will also point out that one thing I really enjoyed with some of the people who are here, including India and Luke, is that one of the pieces in this book is a ritual that several of us wrote together for Loki for the virtual Troth Moot last year. And that was specifically focused on social justice and speaking out against things like racism, state violence, really taking what we can pull from the Lord, from our own devotional practices, and pushing that energy towards, again, towards social justice. And I think that's important that ritual happened, and that also it's recorded in here as well for other people to use potentially if they, because part of publishing a ritual is the idea of other people making rituals based on what they're reading too.
And
That is so cool.
I'm sorry, that is a great, I don't want to say brave, but it is brave. It's just such a cliche to call each other brave now, but because the people that practice like the way you practice, you have this, I mean, we all have to be very vocally activists for justice and social equity and anti-racism and stuff, But when it comes to paganism, you guys were left with the hot bag of hot potatoes, So it's like you really have to like emphasize and reiterate to people that this is not what Loki practice is about. This is not what Henry or any of these Norse traditions are about, and that not because an idiot was wearing a tattoo on the trying to destroy our government,
Ugh.
y'all are the same. Because and then we need to educate ourselves, and we need to have this type of conversations with y'all to kind of like understand all of this and support each other. So thank you for letting us that that is in the book, so then we can actually tell other people like, no, look, the real people who are doing the real deal are not the idiot on TV.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think Amy in the comments actually said something really lovely in here about how let me see if I can actually pull it up. There are almost as many ways to work with and perceive Loki as there are people. So it's fascinating to read this collection. And I think, like you said, Laura, it's sort of like just even hearing from actual Lokians sort of widens how that looks. But Bat, I know you've been practicing for a while. Was there anything from like the submissions in this book that gave you like a new perspective on him, or like really added to your like a new way of people seeing him?
Sure. I'll answer that first. The first thing that comes to mind, I'll answer in a way that just sort of re-emphasized how I know a lot of people see him, even though I don't personally see him this way. Of the Mind Monster comic. Again, I love this comic. I don't perceive him in a parental or sort of like mentor type role for me personally. But I thought this was beautiful because it's talking about someone who feels monstrous, who feels unlovable by society, and Loki coming around and basically giving them a pep talk about how monstrousness, when perceived by others, right, is not necessarily like particularly perceived by oppressive society, basically, is not necessarily a bad thing. It can be a really beautiful thing. So I loved that. In terms of things that made me think about things in a totally different way, I mean, I can shout out to your stories, actually, that there were some moments there, and by you, I mean you, Luke. Yeah. So they have 3 stories in here that sort of tell this journey. So mythic time is all over the place, right? There's not necessarily chronological order, but stories that tell this journey in an increasingly painful way to me about Loki's disillusionment with the Aesir and eventually their harm to his children, and sort of the ways that these relationships are falling apart in this part of the timeline. And I would say that some of the sort of internal thoughts that are going on in these short stories really struck me. It made me think about things in a different way.
That's really cool. I like that a lot. I didn't even think about that. I just did, and I've read those songs, those stories over and over and over again. So we are coming to the close. So what final thoughts do you have? What would you like to end this with? With any final thoughts or anything?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I guess I would just like to emphasize that even though I'm talking a lot throughout this, and that my name is on the title of this, it really isn't just my book, right? This really is a book with 16 different people who equally gave huge amounts of devotion and passion into everything that they submitted. And it really is a communal effort. And I love that, because a huge part of Loki for me is the idea of, it's not just him, it's his whole family. It's like the idea of all these like love and connections, instead of like individualism, right? So I guess that's what I would like to end on, is that check out the book. And it is not, don't just think of it as like it's Bat's book. It is this like, it's a snapshot of this community.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for being here. Don't go anywhere. I'm going to stop the recording and open it up for.
Look, shows the
questions.
book. Part
Oh
of
yeah,
it.
show us the
Oh,
book.
yeah.
Shows the book and the title, please, before you go. But you
Yeah,
need to
Say
talk.
something.
Here you go. Well, it's reversed, but Blood Unbound, a Loki devotional edited by Bat Collazo.
Woohoo! All right. So, those of you guys who have never seen the show, we are here twice a month. We're actually going to change our days. It used to be the second and fourth Thursdays, and now it's going to be the first and third Thursdays. And apparently we're also on Facebook Live, yay! And we're also on YouTube and iTunes and Amazon and everything else. So thank you for you guys for being here, and we shall see you soon.